So today we're absolutely tearing down a wall of misinformation in the travel nursing industry. Look, pretty much every pay ranking you've ever seen likely puts California right at the top. And hey, if we're only looking at gross pay, yeah, that's totally accurate. But here's the catch. Gross pay is definitely not take-home pay. The 2026 data completely shatters this huge industry myth about what actually hits your bank account. So buckle up, because we're going to look at the real numbers that agencies don't exactly love to highlight.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Just look at this contrast. On the left, you've got California flashing this massive gross pay of $3,500 a week. I mean, it looks incredible, right? But then, over on the right, we have Washington State showing about $2,944 a week. Now, at first glance, California seems like an absolute no-brainer. But look a little closer at that Washington side, 0% state income tax. That stark contrast between California's big headline numbers and Washington's actual net pay reality, well, that is the entire foundation of what we're uncovering today.
Part 1. The Gross Pay Myth. We're taking a look at how headline rates can seriously mislead you, regardless of your specialty.
So, looking at the Tier 1 gross pay leaders, California firmly leads the nation. They are regularly hitting $3,500 to $3,600 a week. New York and Massachusetts follow pretty closely behind, which is largely driven by those premiums paid at major urban hospitals in places like, New York City and Boston. If you're only looking at these gross numbers, your bags are probably already packed for the coast. And this brilliantly illustrates the rest of the top tier. New Jersey benefits from that NYC spillover demand. But notice the middle there. Washington and Alaska are putting up highly competitive gross rates too. Washington is touching $3,000 a week, and Alaska sits really strong at over $2,400 with those seasonal frontier premiums.
Moving on to Part 2, the net pay adjustment, revealing what state taxes actually cost your specialty.
Okay, here is the first part of a very special list. In 2026, there are exactly 9 states that impose absolutely zero state income tax on your wages. Here are the first 5: Alaska, Florida, Nevada, New Hampshire, and South Dakota. Now, while places like New Hampshire and South Dakota might have a slightly more limited travel nurse market, a state like Florida, it combines that sweet zero state income tax with steady, year-round demand.
And here are the remaining 4 no-income tax states: Tennessee, Texas, Washington, and Wyoming. I really want you to lock your focus on Texas and Washington for a second. These are massive volume and strong rate markets. They combine that magical zero state tax with incredibly high travel nurse demand. Really, they are structural powerhouses for your earning potential.
Now, running the exact math is where the illusion totally shatters. So, on a California assignment, roughly 30% of your gross pay is your taxable wage. California's heavy state income tax, which tops out at a whopping 13.3%, is going to siphon off roughly $98 to $140 a week just from that taxable portion alone. But over on the Washington side, the math is beautifully simple. $0 taken for state tax.
So just look at this hero-sized number right here, $100 plus. A Washington assignment can actually net you $100 or more per week than a California contract. And yes, that's even if the California contract had a higher gross pay on the original listing. Think about it. You're working the exact same hours, but your take-home is just flat out higher. That is the calculation almost everyone skips, and it's absolutely crucial.
Shifting our focus to the Tier 2 value states, we find markets that provide an incredible balance of demand and tax advantage. Texas and Florida are total heavyweights here, offering zero state income tax and massive year-round job volume. Illinois is also a fantastic Midwestern hub. They offer competitive rates and high-acuity facilities, all with a flat, very predictable 4.95% tax rate.
Rounding out our value states, we've got Arizona, North Carolina, and Tennessee. These are fast-growing travel nurse markets that offer extremely low, or in Tennessee's case, literally zero state tax rates. If you want strong options outside the typical coastal hubs, these states provide massive value for your time.
But wait, before we build our decision matrix, we really have to talk about friction. The Nurse Licensure Compact, or NLC, is a massive structural advantage. It essentially allows you to practice in other 39 member states without having to get a separate license for every single one. It's a game changer. But note the critical friction point here. California is not a member. To work there, you actually have to go through a whole separate licensing process with the California Board of Registered Nursing, and that takes anywhere from 2 to 4 months. And as we all know, time is money in this industry.
Which brings us to the 3-filter framework. This is a concrete, data-backed system to evaluate any specialty assignment.
Let's break it down. Filter 1 is gross pay. Always start by verifying what your specific specialty actually commands in that target state's market. An ICU rate and an LND rate are entirely different numbers. So don't just look at average state rates. Look at your specialty's specific rate in that state to establish your absolute baseline.
Filter 2 is net pay. Okay, this is where you grab your calculator. Take the taxable wage portion of the offer, which is usually roughly 25 to 35% of your weekly total, and apply that state tax reduction. Seriously, do not skip this step. Finding the true net pay is literally the only way to compare apples to apples across state lines.
And filter 3 is cost of living. You want to use this as a directional check. Remember, the cost of living varies wildly within states. A contract in San Francisco might pay more gross than one in Sacramento, but those Bay Area housing costs, they will completely eat into any of those gross pay advantages. So definitely model your housing costs carefully.
Let's move to the final decision matrix and see how this all builds. We're combining gross pay, tax burden, compact access, and job volume to find your absolute best real-world value.
Up at the very top of our matrix, Washington and Texas score a flawless 5 stars overall. And why is that? Because they perfectly balance high gross pay and massive volume with the extreme advantage of zero state tax. Plus, for Texas, you get that compact access. Meanwhile, the reigning gross pay champion, California, actually drops down to 4 stars overall. That high tax burden and that 2 to 4 month licensing friction really drag down its overall efficiency.
Looking at the rest of the matrix, states like Florida, New York, and Tennessee all hold strong at 4 stars, balancing out their respective pros and cons. New York has massive gross pay, but really high taxes. Florida and Tennessee have slightly lower gross pay, but hey, zero taxes and great compact access. It's all about how these factors interact for your specific situation.
The absolute crucial point is this. Gross pay is what agencies advertise. Net pay is what you actually deposit. Really let that sink in for a second. $100 a week in tax savings is $1,300 over a standard contract. Over a full year, that's nearly $4,000 in pure savings, just by choosing a different state. The highest paying state and the best paying state are not always the exact same thing.
Which brings us to the ultimate question for you. Knowing the real math behind gross versus net pay, which state will you choose to maximize your take-home in 2026? It's time to run your own numbers, use that 3-filter framework, and take absolute control of your next contract. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I will see you in the next one.